A thin veil of mist lay over Seattle's morning like a silk scarf stretched across the sky. The wooden house on Queen Anne Hill, where Lydia Hart and her husband Greg Whitaker had lived for nearly 4 decades, was as quiet as ever. The coffee maker dripped in a steady rhythm, blending with the far-off rush of wind and waves from Puget Sound. Lydia stood by the window, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, eyes resting on the family photos along the staircase. Each smile, each face of their 3 children, now gone from the nest, suddenly made the house feel vast and hollow. Greg still hadn't returned from the Portland business trip he'd left for 3 days earlier. He was always busy, that was the line Lydia had used for years to soothe herself. He worked tirelessly climbing to the CEO seat at a construction firm. For 40 years, Lydia had been the perfect home front, cooking dinners, sorting paperwork, picking up the kids, keeping the peace. But lately, a strange emptiness had begun to open up inside her. Greg spoke less, dodging her gaze. When they talked, their movie nights had vanished. In their place came midnight work texts and endless urgent meetings. Lydia confided in Sloane Pierce, her closest friend of 30 years, about the changes. Sloane chuckled softly, poured more wine, and said, "Men in their 60s, Lydia. They're all like that. They fear getting old, so they bury themselves in work to feel important." Lydia nodded, trying to believe it. But that evening, a folded piece of paper fell out when she straightened the desk drawer to find a tax receipt. A hotel invoice from Cannon Beach was booked under Greg Whitaker for a double suite the previous weekend. Her heart clenched. Cannon Beach, where they'd celebrated their 30th anniversary, where Greg had said, "If there's a next life, I'd still choose you." Lydia sat down and held the invoice. Part of her wanted to laugh, another part wanted to be sick. The twinge of being betrayed intuition she'd pushed away before had flared at times, and she'd always dismissed it. "I'm just being paranoid," she'd told herself. But now it was no longer imagination. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. The clock ticked like a countdown to something about to shatter. In the lamplight, she went through the drawers, papers, old receipts. 1, then 2, then 3 more, each from the same hotel in Cannon Beach, spread across months, across years. Her hands trembled. Those business trips had been getaways, and she, the devoted wife, had been home cooking dinners that went cold. She picked up her phone and opened Sloane's messages. The latest a few days ago, Greg said he'll be in meetings all weekend. "You should take it easy, Lydia." Greg had lied. But why did Sloane know his schedule more precisely than Lydia did? The next morning, Lydia rose earlier than usual. She put on a navy cardigan, brewed coffee like always, and kept her voice steady when Greg walked in. He brought a new scent, heavy and sweet, not the familiar Old Spice aftershave. "Trip went smoothly," she asked. "Yeah, exhausting. But it's sorted. Next week should be lighter." "Which hotel did you stay at?" Lydia asked lightly, cup in hand. "Portland Marriott, the one by the river, remember?" She smiled and set the cup down. In the morning light, Greg was still the man who once made her believe in forever. Salt and pepper hair, calm smile, warm voice. But now every word left a scratch. After he left for work, Lydia sat alone for a long time. Outside, the rain started, Seattle rain, persistent and cold. She lifted the invoice and stared at the bolded line at the bottom, double ocean suite. 2 guests. 2 people. No other name but enough. At noon, Sloane called. "Lydia, I heard Greg's almost finished with the Oregon project." "Congrats, Mum," Lydia murmured. "He said it's been a grind." "Oh, that reminds me, Cannon Beach is gorgeous this season. We have to go back sometime." Lydia said nothing. Sloane's voice was too light, too casual. But beneath it, Lydia heard something else, a familiarity only someone who had been there could have. That evening, Lydia couldn't eat. She poured a glass of wine and sat by the window watching the rain. Years of sacrifice rolled back like a film in reverse, the night shifts at the hospital, turning down grad school to raise the kids, the times she soothed Greg through his first failures. Everything. I was wrong to believe that kindness alone could sustain a long love. The voice in her head sounded hoarse, as if it belonged to someone else. Late at night, she opened the laptop and pulled up old photos. In the album Summer 2018, Cannon Beach, there was a shot she'd taken of Greg from afar, standing on the beach house balcony, turned toward the waves. Beside him, blurred at the edge of the frame, was a red scarf. She remembered that day she'd been on a night shift in Seattle. Lydia shut the screen, a hand pressed to her chest as if something gripped her heart. But instead of crying, she went straight to the study and opened the lockbox. Inside was a small silver USB, her archive of family documents, receipts, and records. For the first time in her life, she backed up everything of Greg's accounts, bank statements, property bills, and loan agreements. not out of curiosity, but self-protection. At 2 a.m., Lydia exhaled. The house was utterly still. Wind hissed along the eaves. She went to the wooden cabinet and took out the brown journal Greg had given her on their 20th anniversary. On the first page, the inscription remained, "For the woman who carries the world on her shoulders, I'll love you always." She turned to a blank page and wrote her pen, slightly shaking. "If you ever truly loved me, you should know this. Betrayal doesn't just kill love, it kills the part of me that once trusted most." She looked out at the rain. A thought flashed light, but sharp as lightning. If this love has rotted through, I will be the one to bury it, not the one buried with it. Lydia closed the journal and switched off the light. She didn't pray for a peaceful sleep for the first time in years. She only wanted morning to come quickly so she could begin to face it. Share your story if you've ever been betrayed yet chose to rise instead of collapse. Write it in the comments. Someone may need to know they can be as strong as you. Follow for more unfolding details. The next morning, Seattle stayed a flat gray as if it had never known sunlight. Thin raindrops crawled down the window, streaking into silver trails. Lydia sat at the dining table, her coffee long cold. Greg left early as usual with a perfunctory smile and his dark leather briefcase. He still played the attentive husband, kissing her cheek before he went as if nothing strange had happened the night before. But inside Lydia, everything had changed. As the door clicked shut, she went quietly into Greg's office. For years, she'd treated it as off-limits. She'd believed a durable marriage didn't need surveillance. Now, every corner held a question with no answer. Dim light from the window fell over the tidy desk. Everything was arranged except for a photo lying face down in a corner. Lydia turned it over. Her heart nodded. In the picture, Greg is standing on the beach house balcony at Cannon Beach with a wine glass in hand and the slanting afternoon sun touching his hair. Beside him, a woman in a white dress leaned her head on his shoulder. Even with a glance, Lydia recognized the red scarf, the shade Sloane always wore to evening parties. Something went utterly still inside her. The rain, the clock, even her own breath seemed to dissolve. One word echoed in her head: Sloane, the best friend of 30 years who had sat with her at her mother's funeral, toasted at her daughter's wedding, and shared countless afternoons over tea, was the woman standing next to Lydia's husband in that photo. Lydia held the frame, her hands trembling. A wave of nausea rose. She stepped back, inhaled slowly, and opened the usual desk drawer, notebooks, folders, sticky notes. But within a brown file folder, she found a thick envelope scrawled with Cannon Beach. Private project. She opened it. Hotel bills, room reservations, wine receipts, and 2 theater tickets in Portland the same day Greg had said he was staying late for meetings. All of it was charged to their joint card. Lydia sat crumpling a receipt in her fist. Each tiny detail is locked into a seamless chain of betrayal: the business trips, the messages, and Sloane's casual mentions of Greg's schedule. She remembered a dinner last year when Sloane came over in a red dress with a bottle of Bordeaux. Greg praised the wine and Sloane smiled. It's his favorite, Lydia. Men rarely change their palates even when someone's already cooking for them. Back then, Lydia took it as a joke. Now it rang like a dull blade twisting through memory. She switched off the office light and stepped into the hallway. The house was eerily quiet. No children's voices, no weekend jazz. Greg used to play only Rain Soft, but relentless. Lydia sat on the sofa, turned the frame face down, and quietly wept. Late afternoon, she went to the small gallery on Queen Anne Avenue, the one she and Sloane used to visit monthly. She hadn't meant to meet anyone to find a sliver of calm. But a familiar voice sounded behind her. "Lydia, I knew I'd run into you here." Sloane stood there in a beige trench, soft brown curls, her face bright. She looked the same, refined, confident, and apparently innocent. Lydia forced a smile. "It's been a while. Busy work and some personal things. How's Greg? I heard he's wrapping up a project in Oregon." Lydia looked into her friend's eyes. She saw no crack, like none of it existed. She meant to hold her tongue, but the words came out cool and light. "Do you still go to Cannon Beach?" Sloane stiffened. Just for a second, but Lydia saw her lips tighten. "Oh, not lately. Why? Just curious. I found a few of Greg's things. There were photos." The air thickened. Sloane met her gaze, a flicker of caution in her eyes. Then she let out a soft, carefully measured laugh. "Lydia, what are you implying? Greg is your husband. I care about both of you." The line sounded like denial, but also like a statement. Lydia didn't answer. She nodded once and walked away. By the time she stepped out into the drizzle, she knew the woman in that photo was no longer my best friend, she was an accomplice. That night, Lydia opened a bottle of wine but didn't drink. She sat at the computer and pulled up Greg's old email. A string labeled Weekend Project. Private was buried among hundreds of work threads. Only brief lines, the recipient initials, SP. She didn't need to guess Sloane Pierce. In the final email, Greg had written, "She'll find out eventually. But trust me, I'll handle it. Cannon Beach still uses the old key, right?" A single sentence was enough to strip away the veneer. Lydia leaned back, staring into the bright screen. Something in her switched off. The pain no longer howled, it settled like ash over a once raging fire. She told no one. She didn't call Greg. She didn't text Sloane. The next morning, Lydia drove straight to Cannon Beach, where the truth had begun. The coastal road curled along the water, wind sharp with brine and kelp sneaking through the window seals. The beach house came into view, weathered gray shingles, a balcony facing Haystack Rock. The door was still open, the lock unchanged. Greg had been right. Cannon Beach still uses the old key. Inside, everything sat between two worlds: lipstick on a wine glass, a woman's coat draped over a chair, the faint breath of perfume everywhere. Lydia stood in the center of the room, feeling like a stranger in her own life. She walked down the hall and stopped at a round mirror. In it stood a silver-haired woman with tired eyes deep within them, a steadiness that was no longer meek. She took out her phone and photographed everything, each trace, each detail, like documenting a crime scene. She knew she had no tears left. Tears were a luxury now. At dusk, she sat on the balcony and watched the sea turn to slate in the fog. Each wave slapped the shore like the thud of a heart learning to harden. On the table lay Greg's notebook, open to a scrawl in his hand. S. Don't worry, she'll never find out. Lydia let out a dry, emotionless laugh. She tore the page out and dropped it into the half-full wine glass. The ink bled into pale purple threads, spreading then disappearing. She shut the beach house door at sunset, locked it, and slipped the key into her pocket. The cold wind pulled at her hair, but Lydia didn't fasten her coat. She stood there staring at the darkening horizon. An old chapter had closed, not with a scream, but with a cold and proud silence. Back in Seattle that night, Lydia created a new folder on her laptop, Cannon Beach, Evidence. In the dark, the blue glow lit her face, the face of a woman who had lost everything, and at the same time was beginning to reclaim herself. That evening, Seattle's sky sagged under heavy gray clouds. Streetlights glittered on the wet pavement, stretching into long threads like taut strings between past and present. Lydia sat in the living room, the silver USB drive on the table beside the Cannon Beach photo sealed in an envelope. All day she hadn't spoken to anyone. No calls to the children, no answering Sloane, no messages to Greg, too. In her mind, every question had been settled. Only one thing remained: speak the truth. Greg's car pulled up at 8. Lydia drew in a breath. The lamp cast a warm, amber pool across her face, making her look gentle and distant. Greg walked in the same cologne and smile, as if nothing in his world had fallen apart. "You're still up. I thought you'd be tired." Lydia didn't reply at once. She poured herself a glass of water and set it down. The tap of glass on wood sounded dry and final. "Do you have time to talk, Greg?" He paused, surprised by her even tone. "Of course. What's going on?" Lydia stood slowly, opened a drawer, and laid the receipts out one by one, neat as a nurse laying out surgical tools. Last, she placed the photo on top. "I want to know, how long?" Greg looked down. For a second, the composure on his face collapsed. He glanced up and attempted a smile. "Lydia, you're misunderstanding. These..." "Don't," she cut in, voice soft but blade sharp. "Please don't call it work. Please don't call it a mix-up. I read the emails, Greg, the photos, the Cannon Beach bills, and the messages between you and Sloane." That name struck the room like a hammer to glass. Greg blanched. He looked away, searching for a defense that wouldn't come. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You call sleeping with your wife's best friend not going too far." A laugh snagged in her throat, not the laugh of someone in pain, but of someone out of feeling. Greg sat down, fingers-laced eyes avoiding hers. "I was wrong, I know, but it's more complicated than you think. Sloane and I..." It was a moment of weakness, a moment Lydia's voice was almost a whisper. "These receipts span 4 years, Greg. If that's a moment, my entire life must be..." Temporary. The air thickened and it was hard to breathe. Lydia went to the window and stared at the rain-soaked yard. Droplets reflected the light like splinters of glass. Do you know what hurts most? She turned back, eyes wet but clear. Not the infidelity, it's who you chose to betray me with. A woman who ate at this table held my hand at my mother's funeral, promised to look after me if you were ever away. You two didn't just wreck our marriage, you cracked open the idea of friendship I'd believed in for half a lifetime. Greg was silent. For the first time in years, he looked small. The confident posture that once drew admiration was gone. In its place stood a lost man stripped of the means to hide his cowardice. I'm sorry, he said, voice thinning into the rain. When was the last time you told me that, when I forgot our 28th anniversary? Right. And you promised never to hurt me again. Lydia smiled sadly. You kept that promise well, Greg. You didn't just hurt me, you finished me. She lifted the photo, studied it, then handed it to him. Do you know why I kept this? Because it's the last moment you were still my husband. After this picture, I no longer know who you are. Greg stood and reached for her hand. Lydia, I still love you. Whatever happened, believe that. She looked at his trembling fingers, then gently pulled away. Is your love the kind you have to hide in hotels under false names inside lies? She turned. In her eyes was no salt of tears, only a cold resolve. I don't know what I'll do next, but I know this. Greg, I won't be the one waiting for you anymore. She climbed the stairs, leaving him motionless in the room. The bedroom door closed with a dry thud, punctuating 40 years that had only seemed unbreakable. That night, Lydia didn't sleep. She sat at her desk, lamplight pale on her drawn face, and opened her journal to a fresh page, April 15th, the confrontation. He admitted it, he called it a lapse. But I understand now. Nothing is momentary after all these years. She lifted her head to the window. Rain still fell. In the wind, Lydia heard something faint, her voice returning after years of being muted by the roles of wife, mother, and pleaser. In the morning, she brewed coffee out of habit, 1 cup for the first time. Greg slept downstairs. When he woke, a manila envelope sat on the table. These are the bank documents, the beach house bills, and copies of the joint accounts. You should know I'm reassessing everything. Greg held the envelope in silence. Lydia's tone stayed level. I don't need explanations. I don't need to be lied to again. He started to speak, but Lydia was already at the door. She walked slowly but decisively. Outside, sunlight pried through after days of rain, kindling her shoulders in the doorway like somehow the damage was beginning to harden into strength. At noon, Lydia drove to Gasworks Park. It used to be the place they went to calm down after fights. Now she went alone. Across Lake Union, small sails skimmed the water. The wind stung her cheeks, but she stayed. Memories surged, the simple church wedding the night their first child was born, family laughter around the table. All of it now reels of old film running unrecoverable. Lydia closed her eyes. A strong gust carried salt from the sound. She let the photo slip into the water, spinning away on the corrugated ripples. It's over, Greg, she murmured, oddly calm. Not love, just the fear of being left. She stood watching her reflection, an aging woman, yes, but in those eyes, for the first time in years, the light of self-possession. Back home, she passed Greg at the door. He opened his mouth and she said only, Don't try to rescue what chose to die, Greg. Then she went upstairs and shut the door softly. The old house ticked again, steady as ever, but now it was no countdown to waiting. It was the beginning of an ending. The Queen Anne house sank into a strange stillness in the following days. No morning jazz, no small talk over coffee. Lydia moved through the rooms as usual, watering plants at dawn, folding laundry, but her motions belonged to someone else, cool, precise, remote. Greg tried to act normally. He said good morning, left tulips in a clay vase by the stove, and asked about her day. Lydia didn't react. No anger, no blame. Her silence was a mirror in which Greg saw himself too clearly faithless, exposed, and afraid. Lydia spent more time in her study. Greg thought she was drowning in grief. In truth, she was assembling the wide-angle picture of betrayal. On her desk lay stacks of receipts, printed emails, and transaction logs. Lydia drew fine lines across a legal pad, marking dates, places, overlaps. Each red slash was another fracture knifed open in the past. At 62, she'd thought she no longer had the strength to be angry. Now she knew submerged anger doesn't age. It sleeps waiting for the day you dare to look it in the eye. Near midnight, she turned on a lamp and called the family's old attorney, Rebecca Cole, who had handled the beach house refinance. Rebecca, I need to meet. Just me, not Greg. Are you all right, Lydia? No. But I will be once I know the whole truth. They met the next day. Rain rattled the windows of Rebecca's downtown office. Lydia sat straight, testifying like a witness. Rebecca listened, sometimes jotting notes. When Lydia reached the beach house, Rebecca's eyes sharpened. I remember. 2018, Greg authorized you to sign a refi to lower the rate. He was in Portland. You were the sole legal signatory, which means you may be able to dispose of that asset unilaterally. Lydia held her breath. You mean, can I sell without his signature? If the power of attorney is still valid, yes. We need to confirm the term. Lydia sat quietly. The panorama of deception focused, and a thought of freedom flickered for the first time. That evening, rain still falling, Lydia came home. Greg watched the news in the living room as if nothing had changed. She passed by without a word. When he called after her, Lydia, I'm sorry, please don't shut me out. I want to make this right. Her answer was cool as breath. You can't fix what you chose to break, Greg. She climbed the stairs, leaving him alone in the large house whose once safe walls now echoed his isolation. In the days that followed, Lydia moved. She opened a private account, transferred small sums from joint funds under medical maintenance, reorganized title files on the home equities and retirement accounts. Not out of greed, but because she knew the man in her bed was no longer trustworthy. She sat in the dark living room at night, the city's reflections wavering on the glass. Memories braided Greg's proposal the night she gave birth, all the weekends he was working. Turned over now, the images showed their scarred undersides. She thought of Sloane, the dinners, the laughter, the red dress, and Bordeaux. How did I not see it? It wasn't that Sloane hid it well. It was that Lydia trusted too completely. Trust, the purest thing, had become the sharpest knife in someone else's hand. One afternoon, her phone lit up. Sloane Pierce. Lydia watched it pulse like a wound, then answered. Lydia, I know you're angry, but you have to hear me out. Hear what Sloane, I've heard enough lies. It's not what you think. Greg and I, it was a lapse. He was lonely and lonely. Lydia's voice rasped. Did either of you ever consider how lonely I was? Silence on the line. Lydia's tone thinned to a razor. I don't need your confession. Just this from today on, don't call me again. You and Greg are dead to the life I used to live. She hung up, fist trembling, not with fear but with release. The next day, Lydia drove again to Cannon Beach, not to seek answers, but to reclaim control. The house stood unchanged, but in the amber light, it was no longer a repository of memories, it was evidence. The broker, Amy, a young woman, met her with a gentle smile. It's a beautiful property. If you want to sell, we can move it quickly, 1.2 million, maybe more. Do it, Lydia said evenly. Fast, clean, no complications. They walked from room to room. Amy talked about price contracts and deadlines. Lydia nodded, sighed, and hesitated at nothing. When the pen left the paper, she knew she had just signed a death certificate for a marriage. The beach house had once rung with their summer laughter. Now it would draw a bright line between us. On the drive back, she played Debussy. The light melody seemed like breath itself, yet every note pricked, painful, honest. That night, Rebecca texted, I checked. The POA is still valid. We can settle the sale this week. Lydia stared at the message, afraid and calm in equal measure. Afraid because this was an irreversible step. Quiet because she finally held the wheel of her own life. Greg knew nothing. He slept downstairs in the blue wash of the television. Lydia watched him for a long time, feeling no hatred, only an empty winter lake inside her. She whispered so no one could hear. You taught me that trust is the most expensive thing. Thank you, Greg. I know how to live without it now. Then she returned to her desk and wrote the last line of the day. Not every loss is a tragedy. Some are simply the universe returning us to ourselves. Outside, the rain kept falling, light, persistent. But in the small room, Lydia felt something shift, like the first thread of dawn teasing through cloud after a long night of betrayal. Seattle slipped into May, the sunlight rare and thin, like smoke over everything. Lydia stood at the study window, watching the last cherry blossoms fall. Each petal on the porch counted down to the moment she would leave. After meeting Rebecca, Lydia moved to a different rhythm. Up earlier, speaking less, every action intentional. Greg mistook the silence for healing. It was really preparation for departure. She no longer sought apologies or reconciliation. What Lydia wanted now was freedom, emotional and legal. On a Monday morning, Lydia drove to Astoria, the coastal city in Oregon, where she met broker Amy to finalize the beach house valuation. The sky was sheathed in cloud, but the sea flashed silver. Inside, Lydia was a focused calm, the kind a nurse feels before a complex operation, fear but total concentration. Amy greeted her warmly. I've reviewed everything. If you want to list, I can bring buyers within 2 weeks. Depending on interiors, the market is strong at $1.2 to $1.5 million. I'm not keeping anything, Lydia said quietly. Sell it fast, cleanly. The broker blinked a little surprised. Most sellers feel sentimental about a house like this. I don't mourn the past, Lydia answered, polite but cold. I mourn the years I believed the wrong things. Northbound to Seattle, Lydia mapped the plan. Step 1. Change all joint account passwords. Step 2. Open a new bank account at a different institution. Move retirement funds. Step 3. Hire an independent financial attorney. Root sale proceeds to an escrow account in her name. Step 4. Cancel Greg's secondary cards. Greg was careful but arrogant. He believed she'd never leave. His confidence was the weak seam she tugged. In the brown-bound journal, Lydia logged daily transactions and calls. The script was even firm, like a field note written by someone leaving her old life. Greg came home late, surprised to find Lydia sorting papers on the dining table. What's all this? You look serious. She said she was reviewing property paperwork without looking up. Rebecca wants some updates. He frowned. You saw Rebecca? About what? Nothing much. Title clarifications. I assume you want everything transparent too? He fell quiet. Wariness flickered, then vanished. He didn't know she had begun recording certain exchanges not to ambush him, but to protect herself if he later denied anything. That night, Lydia told Claire, her eldest, in Boston. Claire's voice shook. Mom, I don't know what to say. Dad and Sloane. I can't believe it. I couldn't either, Lydia said softly. But the evidence doesn't lie. What will you do now I'm handling it? Not to get revenge so no one can ever steal my peace again. Do you want me to come home? No. Stay. I'll be fine. Don't take sides. I won't make you choose. Claire cried. Lydia listened to her daughter's tears. The ache was there, but the weakness was gone. Some wounds she knew aren't healed by love. Only time sands them dull. 3 days later, they ate together. Greg tried. I read an article about retiring early in Santa Barbara. Let's move, start fresh. Lydia set down her fork and looked straight at him. Start fresh with whom, Greg? With me, the woman you betrayed, or someone else? He faltered, then drew a breath. I was stupid, Lydia. I don't deserve it, but I hope you'll forgive me. Forgiveness is possible, Lydia said evenly. Forgetting isn't. And living as if nothing happened certainly isn't. He studied her for a long time. Maybe for the first time he saw that the woman before him, still in a worn cardigan, still gentle, held something he'd never seen: finality. Late Lydia drove to Lake Union. The water was ink dark. The wind is cold, but not cruel. She took the beach house key from her pocket, the emblem of their second home, where Greg had promised to spend their old age together. She opened the car door and tossed the key into the lake, a slight neat sound, then nothing. No tears. She sat a while, her face mirrored in the glass. Perhaps she looked older. But her eyes were brighter than they had been in years, not with trust, but with the knowledge that no one could save her but herself. When she got home, her phone lit up. A message from Sloane. Lydia. I'm genuinely sorry. Greg said he'd choose me, but I don't want to destroy your family. He deceived both of us. If you want to talk, I'm here. Lydia read it slowly. He deceived us both. A late justification. But there was nothing left to forgive or condemn. She typed one line. You're free. And so am I. Then she deleted Sloane's number. At sunrise, Lydia brewed a single cup and put on soft music. Weak light spilled through the blinds. With the bitter smell of coffee, she watched 2 sparrows on the railing and smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. She called Rebecca. I've decided. Proceed with the sale. And prepare the divorce papers. There was a pause. I'll take care of it, Rebecca said. You're doing the right thing. Lydia hung up and gathered old papers into a box. On the lid, she wrote what has passed. Then she opened her journal and wrote the first line of a new chapter. When a door closes, don't stand beside it. Walk on no matter the rain, because the road ahead, however rough, is yours. Outside, rain began again, but this time its rhythm didn't make her feel alone. It beat like the city's pulse, steady with her own, stronger, clearer than ever. June. The rain eased, and the Pacific Northwest light returned, neither sunny nor gloomy, but something bright and between. Lydia steered the old sedan south on Highway 101. The radio murmured beneath the steady hush of tires on damp asphalt. The road seemed endless. Each mile loosened another layer of memory: family trips, summers by the sea, mornings with coffee, while Greg read the paper on the balcony. All of it is now a blur in the rear view. The beach house appeared quiet as a witness: weathered shingles, rust-stained railings, and a window left ajar for the wind. Lydia parked and sat for a few minutes before stepping out. Salt and kelp hit her face, familiar enough to hurt. Every step along the sandy path was like walking through memory. She opened the door. Everything remained as before: the red scarf slung over a chair, the unfinished wine, a small photo fallen by the hearth. She picked it up. Greg was laughing, the smile that softened her for 40 years. She stared at the photo, then slipped it into her pocket, not to keep, but to seal away. Amy was waiting. The house is as we left it. There are buyers lined up. They'd like viewings this week. Go ahead, Lydia said. The sooner the better. They checked each corner. Amy explained pricing, contracts, and timelines. Lydia listened, nodded, and signed. No lingering. When the pen lifted, the last string, tying her to the past, snapped. That evening, Greg called, angrier than he'd been in weeks. Have you lost your mind, Lydia? You don't have the right to sell. That's community property. I used the power of attorney you granted in 2018, she replied. It's valid until the year's end. I never thought you'd actually do it. Exactly. You never thought I would do anything but forgive. Silence. Then his voice sank. Are you taking everything? No. I'm taking back the part of my life you owe me. He hung up. Lydia set the phone down, her hand shaking. She felt no glee, only a hollow space edged with calm, like stepping out of a stifling room while your own echo still rings in your ears. That night she stayed at the beach house once more. Wind battered the siding. Waves boomed against the rock. She placed a candle, a glass of wine, and the signed contract on the table. At the window, the ocean was black as ink. In that darkness, she spoke to the husband she once had, not the man he'd become, but Greg in his 30s, who listened, who laughed at little things. If any part of you is still there, she whispered, know this: you left me the choice to go. The candle shivered, throwing wobbly halos on the glass. Lydia closed her eyes and slept deeply for the first time in months. Driving back to Seattle, the radio cut in: Whitaker Construction CEO under investigation for contract fraud and misuse of company funds. Greg Whitaker is cold as steel through the static. Lydia turned it off. She wasn't surprised. Long deception in marriage had always been walking alongside deception at work. She pulled over and stared at the dim sky. A gull cried sharply overhead. Lydia wondered what Greg would do with nothing left to hold. Then she let the thought go. His life was no longer hers to manage. Rebecca's office was quiet and serious. The attorney placed preliminary divorce filings in front of Lydia. We'll file next week. Given his situation, your position is powerful. The sale proceeds will go into escrow. You're the authorized signer. I don't want him destroyed, Lydia said. I want to leave without being dragged back. That's precisely what you're doing, Rebecca replied, a look of respect softening her features. Most women don't make it this far. I'm not brave, Lydia murmured. I'm just done being humiliated. Rebecca smiled faintly. Sometimes your calm is its own kind of courage. That evening, as Lydia folded laundry, an unfamiliar number appeared. It's Paul Bennett. I heard you sold the beach house. She blinked. Paul, Greg's old friend, the retired architect who had designed the place. I heard Greg's in trouble. Are you all right, Lydia? I am. I've closed that chapter, Paul. If you need someone to review any construction valuations or disclosures, I can help. Thank you. I have counsel. Then just this: you're doing the right thing. A house can be lovely, but no repairs can be made if the foundation is rotted. Lydia was quiet. The line sank straight through her. After she hung up, she sat for a long time thinking about the foundations of her life. Love, trust, family, things that seemed solid, yet termites of deceit had been gnawing for years. On closing day, it rained again. July's first storm washed Cannon Beach clean. Lydia didn't attend. Rebecca handled everything. When the transfer notification appeared just over $1 million, Lydia glanced at the figure and closed the screen. Once a shared dream, it was now simply the price of loss. She took an umbrella and walked through the damp neighborhood. Afternoon. Seattle blurred the cafe on the corner, the flower shop, the church bell. Everything is the same except her. That night she turned off every light and lit a single candle. The house belonged to her alone for the first time. No other breath, no fear of being hurt. Her journal lay open. She wrote, "Today the beach house became someone else's. I'm not sad. Perhaps it was never truly mine, no more than the man who once vowed to love me all my life." She closed the notebook and sipped her tea. Outside, the rain thinned to a breeze. She went to bed early and dreamless. Far away, the sea seemed to murmur, but not the roar of painful memory, only the quiet heartbeat of freedom. Seattle was veiled in mist. Lydia sat by the window of the old cafe on Ballard Avenue, a nearly cold cappuccino in front of her. She'd been there for almost half an hour, eyes on the street where people hunched into their coats, rushing from the wind. She wasn't here to reminisce, but to meet the person who had stolen 30 years of her trust. Sloane had texted the night before, "After months of silence, we need to talk. One last time." It didn't sound like an apology. It sounded like a dare. Lydia agreed, not out of curiosity, but because she needed to close the door herself. Sloane arrived 10 minutes late. She was still beautiful, an intentional beauty, honed by time and poise. A beige wool coat, softly curled brown hair, blue eyes bright under delicate makeup. Lydia Sloane smiled voice-light as if nothing had ever happened. "You look the same, calm and composed as always." Lydia studied her. The anger had cooled long ago, but the disgust remained. "Say it, Sloane. What do you want?" Sloane leaned back and sighed. "Greg's crashed. You know, right, he's under investigation and lost his position. Now, he's lost everything." Lydia was quiet, turning her cup. "He brought it on himself." "I know, but he told me you'd never leave. He thought you were too gentle." A flicker crossed Lydia's face. Sloane tilted her head, a thin smile like a victor testing the loser's reaction. "Did you come to remind me of that? No. I came because I don't want to be remembered as the homewrecker. I want you to understand that Lydia Gregg hasn't been yours for a long time." It was a light sentence that landed like a blade. Lydia's tone stayed even. "Do I still need to hear that I've left both of you behind?" Sloane faltered, then recovered her calm. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to say Greg betrayed me too. He promised to marry me after the divorce. Then he wired money to another woman, one of his project partners. You see, we were both a joke." Lydia looked her in the eye. "What do you want, sympathy, to hate him together so you can feel lighter?" "No. I'm telling you because if he tries to pin everything on me, I won't stay quiet. And if I have to, I'll drag you into it." The cafe air thickened. Lydia set her cup down, voice low and steady. Was that a threat, Sloane? A warning? He's desperate. He'll say anything to save himself. A chill slid along Lydia's spine. Not fear, but the recognition that Greg was still breaking things, even with nothing left to lose. That afternoon, Lydia recounted the conversation to Rebecca. "If she threatened you, we document it. Did you record the meeting I did? I had my phone on." "Good. We'll preserve it if Greg or Sloane tries to implicate you." Rebecca paused. "You've come farther than most people, Lydia, but the legal part won't be easy. They might try to use you as leverage." Lydia's smile was wan. "I'm not afraid anymore, Rebecca. I'm just tired of seeing the true faces of people who once called themselves family." Near midnight, a text arrived from Greg. "I need you. They're trying to put me in prison. You don't understand." Sloane set me up. Lydia read it in silence. Rain drummed on the eaves. She put the phone down without replying. She knew that tone, Greg's weakness, his talent for stirring pity, but she was no longer Lydia from the years before. In the morning he called. She answered, voice level. "I'm no longer part of your life, Greg. Please don't call me. You'll let me die." "No, you're doing that yourself." She hung up. 2 weeks later, Greg was summoned for a hearing. Local news picked it up. On TV, he looked older, hair-grayed suit, creased eyes, exhausted. Lydia watched without satisfaction, only emptiness. That afternoon, Sloane appeared at Lydia's door. She was thinner and haggard, and her makeup could not mask the collapse. "Lydia, I'm sorry," Sloane rasped. "They asked me about the transfers. I told the truth." He He says I'm lying. They're tracing old accounts. I don't know what to do. Lydia studied her, then opened the door, not out of pity, but because she understood everyone was being punished in their own way. I have Greg's old statements, Lydia said. He charged those expenses to our joint card. I can forward them to the attorneys. Can you help me? Sloane blinked. No, I'll help the truth. No one deserves to be lied to anymore, not even you. Sloane bowed her head, shoulders shaking. For the first time, Lydia believed her tears. It didn't please her, but gave her something else: closure. That night, Lydia poured a glass of red and stood on the balcony. There was a sliver of moon over Seattle. Fremont Bridge lights shivered on the water. Rebecca's words echoed, "When people lie long enough, they get ensnared in their own web. You don't have to do anything." Lydia nodded to herself. Perhaps real justice didn't arrive in shouts. It arrived when you were calm enough to step out of the war and watch those who hurt you face their consequences. The wine trembled in her hand with the breeze. She closed her eyes. The scent of dark berries mingled with a salt note from the sound, bracing yet gentle. The night was tranquil, and in that quiet, Lydia realized the name Sloane Pierce no longer clenched her heart. It was just a name, a chapter closed in a book she was rewriting line by line. Seattle summers rarely grow hot, but that year the light lingered. One August morning, sunlight spilled through Lydia's bedroom window, washing the cream walls. For the first time in months, her chest felt light. The silence at home was no longer emptiness, it was peace. Around noon, as she boxed old books, Rebecca called. "Lydia, I wanted you to hear that Greg has pleaded guilty." Rebecca sounded tired but relieved. "He's cooperating for a reduced sentence. With the evidence you provided, you're completely clear. The divorce is finalized." Lydia sat, gripping the phone. "So, it's truly over." "Yes," Rebecca said gently. "Officially over." Lydia nodded, though the lawyer couldn't see. A strange feeling drifted in, not joy, but a wind passing through a room long shut. Greg, once a constant in her life, was now only a brief segment on the morning news. She went out to Pike Place, where she and Greg used to buy flowers and fish on Sundays. The air held brine batter and coffee. Today it all felt different. Howard, the old florist, was still there. He smiled. "Haven't seen you in years." "I've been through a storm," Lydia said. "Storms pass. What matters is you're still standing." He wrapped lavender in twine. The scent was so gentle, Lydia nearly cried. She'd forgotten what it felt like to buy something only because she liked it, not because someone else did. At home, she set the lavender on the dining table, once a battleground of silence. Now just a sunlit, quiet corner. That evening, Claire called from Boston. "Mom, I read about Dad. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Lydia said softly. "Your father's life isn't ours anymore. Are you okay?" "I am. I'm learning how to live alone." Claire was quiet, then her voice shrank. "I'm sorry for the times I didn't believe you. I thought Dad just lost his way a little. I understand now. You're stronger than we realized." Lydia smiled, eyes damp, but tears didn't fall. "Remember this, Claire, never place your life in someone else's hands, not even someone you love most." In that moment, Lydia felt the old bruise between her and her children begin to heal. With everything concluded, Lydia found the quiet unfamiliar. No emergency calls, no sleepless nights over files or memories, just stillness, almost frightening. She began morning walks around Green Lake. Each lap was a way of counting time regained. Wind combed the trees, light rippled the water. Often she saw a tall, silver-haired man by the footbridge who smiled in greeting. "Good morning?" At first she only nodded. Later they spoke more about the weather ducks and maples turning. His name was Paul Bennett, a retired architect who had once phoned to check on her. He now lives a few blocks away. One afternoon, rain struck again. Lydia was about to leave when Paul called out, umbrella raised. "Rain like this, don't walk home alone," he said, a hint of concern. "Let me see you back." They walked in silence, rain pattering on the lake. His coat smelled faintly of pine, warm, familiar, and something in Lydia eased. At the house, she made tea. Paul glanced around the neat space, eyes settling on the lavender. "Beautiful," he said, "but it feels too quiet here. I'm learning not to fear loneliness." She half smiled. "Loneliness isn't scary, only not knowing who you are is." The word stopped her. In the lamplight, Paul looked calm and sincere. He didn't ask about the past or pity her. He sat there as if his presence were enough. A week later, Rebecca brought a sealed envelope. From Greg. Forwarded through the court. I didn't read it. Lydia opened it. The familiar, controlled scrawl, Lydia, I'm not asking for forgiveness. Losing everything taught me what I'd thrown away. I'm not writing to beg you back, only to say that if I could do it over, I'd choose silence rather than lies. Greg. It was only 2 short paragraphs. Lydia read them several times, not out of longing, but of relief. He had finally admitted it not just to the law, but to the truth. Late or not, it was a kind of release. She folded the letter and placed it with the divorce papers. September arrived. Maples reddened. The sky darkened earlier. Lydia cooked red and joined a community photography class. Each morning she still met Paul by the lake. He brought an old camera and shot clouds, birds, and sometimes her. Why me? She teased. Because you don't know it yet, he said. But when someone has just found themselves again, there's a different light in their eyes. She laughed, not forced, not guarded, lighter than she'd felt in years. One night she rearranged the living room. She took down the wedding photo and replaced it with one she'd taken herself, Green Lake at sunset, a pair of birds cutting across the sky. She stared at it long, then curled up under a wool throw on the sofa. Soft jazz murmured from the radio. There was no one beside her and no sense of lack. In her own voice, not anyone else's, a thought rose. At last, I'm living my life. Outside wind threaded the trees, rain whispering on the roof. Seattle rested, and in that small house, Lydia knew that a new chapter had begun. Not one shadowed by apologies or ghosts, but by the freedom to live on her own terms. October. Seattle grew cold. On leaf-strewn streets, Lydia strolled, hands tucked in her coat. Mist beaded her glasses, blurring like memories she no longer tried to wipe clean. A year had passed since the collapsed Marriage Reputation Trust. It had also been a year of learning to breathe, laugh, and stand in a world no longer orbiting someone else. That morning, while watering plants, her phone pinged. A message from Greg sent from federal custody. Lydia, I heard you're still in Queen Anne? I don't expect a reply. I want to know you're okay. Here each day feels like winter. I miss the light from our window and the coffee you made every morning. Don't forgive me, I don't deserve it. But if you ever loved me, keep that memory instead of what I did at the end. Lydia stood a long while, no anger, no tenderness, only quiet. She deleted the message and went back inside. In her mind, an old line of hers returned. Not every loss is a tragedy. Some are how the universe returns us to ourselves. Claire and her husband Liam flew in from Boston. The house felt lively again. Lydia made lasagna and salad, Claire's childhood favorites. It's so peaceful here, Claire said, setting wild daisies on the table. I'd forgotten this feeling. Peace is something you choose. Lydia smiled. Not something you wait for. Over dinner, they talked work and babies. Afterward, Claire asked while washing dishes, do you ever think about starting over? You mean loving someone else? Yes, I see you with Mr. Bennett, Lydia chuckled. Paul's a friend. As for starting over, I'm not sure. Maybe you don't need new love to be alive again. Sometimes it's enough to be no longer hurt. Claire looked at her, part admiration, part sadness. That sounds strong and lonely. Loneliness isn't bad, honey. It lets you hear yourself. The next day, Paul dropped by with a wooden frame. Inside was a photo of Lydia from behind, standing by Green Lake, silver hair tossed by the wind, reflected in gold-streaked water. A gift, he said. It's my favorite shot. Why? Because you didn't know you were being photographed. There's something in your stance, like you finally set down something heavy. She smiled, accepting the frame. Maybe others saw her strength before she did. They drank tea by the window, discussing books and trips neither had taken when they were young. Paul spoke of his wife gone 7 years and the following silent winters. When I met you, he said, I remembered people can find gentleness at any age. Lydia didn't answer. She looked out at the lake where late sun thinned over the surface and felt her heart tremble like a thread in the wind. That night she unlocked an old wooden box. Inside were things she'd avoided: a dulled wedding band, a Santa Monica wedding photo, a letter Greg wrote on his first business trip in 1989, the 25th anniversary card, the last before the fall. She laid them out not to relive, but to face them. Each item is a scar, painful yet healed. She lit a candle and looked for a long time, then rewrapped everything and carried the box to the back porch. She didn't burn it. She placed it in the cupboard and closed the door. Enough, she whispered. The past doesn't need to disappear. It only needs to rest. Late in the month, heavy rain fell. A parcel arrived from the post office, but there was no return address. It was just from Portland. Inside was a printed note with a handwritten line, "I represent Greg Whitaker's former company." Before asset seizure, he left a small sum to a beneficiary named Lydia Whitaker, with a note, "This is what I never got to give her to thank her for 30 years at my side. It isn't much, but we need confirmation. Do you accept?" Lydia folded the letter and wrote briefly, "No. Please allocate it to the Employee Welfare Fund. I've received enough." Her hands shook not from pain now, but from pity for a man who never knew the worth of what he had. In early November, Queen Anne held its fall festival. Neighbors invited Lydia to help hang photos. She brought her prints Green Lake at dusk, a bundle of dried lavender, her window glazed with morning fog. People paused, saying the images felt calm. A middle-aged woman told her, "Your photos make me peaceful, like someone finally learned to accept what's gone." Lydia smiled. "Maybe because that's what I'm learning." Paul came by with hot cocoa. "I told you," he grinned, "your eye catches what others miss, the small stubborn things." They watched lanterns lift into the night warm gold, drifting higher each, carrying a scrap of the past lighter and lighter. That night, Lydia opened the window and breathed the cold air. The city lay in mist. She set Paul's framed photo on the shelf. A candle guttered on the table light, smearing across the glass. Her face returned in reflection, not young but unafraid. She wrote in the journal that had followed her through it all. After betrayal, loneliness, and loss, what remains isn't resentment, it's understanding. Loving someone is easy. The hard part is learning to love yourself again after they leave. She capped the pen. Outside, the rain softened to a breeze slipping along the eaves. Lydia smiled, faintly, eyes far away. No more Gregs tomorrow. No more fear of being alone. Only a new Lydia is storm-worn and scarred, proof that a heart, however often it breaks, still remembers how to beat. The first winter morning frosted the city white. From the window, Lydia looked down the gentle slope of Queen Anne cottages tucked in milky light. Her house had changed, creamy walls, pots of purple asters on the porch, a round wooden table by the window where she read each morning. No old radio, no man's footsteps on the floorboards, only the sound of breath and quiet, once terrifying, now familiar. Steam rose from her coffee, Arabica mingled with a trace of cinnamon. Lydia opened the small notebook that had carried her for nearly 2 years, pages of jagged entries, pain, then clarity, calm. Today she turned to the last page and wrote slowly, a year after leaving it all. "I see this. No one truly belongs to anyone. Love isn't a promise. It's who we are when the other person is gone." She closed the notebook and slid it into the drawer. The house was silent, but not empty. Outside, the light grew and caught on a framed photo of Green Lake where she and Paul still walked on weekends. That afternoon, Paul stopped by, jacket damp from a fresh shower. "I did a thing," he said with a half-shy smile, holding up 2 train tickets to Oregon. "I heard the fir forests are beautiful this time of year." Lydia looked surprised. "I thought you didn't like going far." "I used to think so," he said, pouring tea. "But people shouldn't stay in one place even when they believe they've found enough peace." She laughed gently. "You're right. When we linger too long, we turn to stone." Paul's gaze warmed steady. "If you come with me, this trip will be different." She paused. Outside, clouds thinned and a pale line of sun ran across the floor. "All right," she breathed. "I'm ready." 2 days later, they boarded at King Street Station. Wheels clanged. The horn sang a goodbye. Lydia watched the city slide away, wet roofs, narrow streets full of memories. Paul carried an old camera and shot relentlessly. Lydia simply watched. A slideshow of life through the window, dark fir forests, bare fields, a few houses tucked into fog. Midway, Paul told stories of his youth driving the west with his wife, nothing but a pickup and a map. "We once got lost in the desert and fought like hell. Looking back, that's the memory I love most." Lydia smiled. "I used to think memory only hurt. It may only hurt until we learn to look at it with gratitude." At a stop in Portland, an email from Rebecca Greggs, being transferred to a facility in Arizona due to health concerns. "He's petitioned for compassionate release for treatment. The court may consider it. You'd want to know." Lydia didn't tremble. She cupped her coffee. Paul asked, "Bad news, no?" "Just the past knocking." She watched the drizzle outside. "I don't hate him anymore. I'm sorry for the years we spent wounding each other." Paul nodded. Forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you. Her eyes shone, but her smile was peaceful. Then maybe I've just done it. At day's end, Paul handed her the camera. Your turn. Please show me the world through your eyes. Lydia hesitated, then lifted the lens toward the sea where sunset pushed through clouds tinting the sky peach. Paul stood slightly off-center in the frame, smiling hair blown wild. She clicked the shutter. A brief moment, but when the image appeared, Lydia saw not only Paul but also herself in the warm light, someone who had traversed loss and could still see beauty. It's good, Paul said. True. Maybe because for once I'm not afraid the past will sneak into the frame. Back in Seattle, winter had arrived. The maple was bare, mist lay heavy over Green Lake. Inside Lydia, no chill remained. She hung the photo of Paul by the window next to one of herself. 2 frames, 2 different lights, 1 spirit people who learned to live after the ruin. That night she brewed cinnamon tea and cracked the window. The season's first snow drifted slowly as the last memories dissolved. She whispered, "Thank you, life, for taking enough away that I could understand the value of what remains." At dawn, she stood on the porch and inhaled the icy air. The sun rose behind rooftops, washing Queen Anne Hill in pale pink. Eyes closed, she let the warmth find her skin. Pain, betrayal parting all behind her now. Not closed, not erased, simply behind. By the window, a small frame quivered in the draft. Sunlight lit the inscription Paul had had engraved during their trip. For those who found peace after the storm. Lydia smiled. The hill lay quiet, the mist thinning. In that new light, the woman on the threshold, calm, unshaken light of step, stood as the coda to a long journey, a heart once shattered that still chose to love life.